you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
Hey guys, thanks for stopping by. I'm really happy today. I've got Mike Brown with me. Mike reached out to me a few days ago. He wanted to talk with me about his mom, who I knew quite well for a while, his mom, Rosemary, and I think we're all familiar with his story. We're going to get into a little bit of that today. Mike is one of the young people, relatively at the time, younger than me, that I was privileged to meet and get to know. Sea Org members when I was working at the international base as a director for Golden Era Productions. So I'm going to bring Mike in and let's make him feel really warm and welcome. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mitch. Hey, thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, hey, no problem. I really appreciate you calling me. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about who you are for those who don't know, which is a couple of people living under a rock because you've been making yourself very known lately, telling the story of how you rescued your mom. So yeah, and how we met.
For sure. So my mother joined Scientology when I was 10 years old. Well, she was in Scientology before that, but joined the Sea organization. And then we moved to California. I grew up at the International Ranch for Kids. It's the International Ranch, we called it, or the Castile Canyon School, and then ended up working at Golden Era Productions for a number of years. My mother was working at the International Base working for some executives, and I was married to a makeup artist who actually was on your shoe crew.
Right, somebody that I knew very well.
Yeah, probably her name still is Samantha, but she's not Samantha Brown anymore. She was
we call her Sam.
Yeah.
I should have I have a photo of her. I should have brought it in, but
oh, there you go. Well, if you want to,
yeah, I'll find it. Go ahead, continue, Mike.
So anyway, I ended up leaving the international base in Golden Era Productions, what Scientologists refer to as blowing. I blew in 2003, and I was about 27 years old and had to start my life over. I didn't, other than a GED, I really didn't have any credit history. I didn't have any resume to really fall back onto because it was all of the time that I had worked for Scientology in their manufacturing divisions of Golden Era Productions or working for executives being their assistants. So it's not like I could use them as a reference moving into the world. Early on in my life, I wanted to be in the military when I was about 15 years old. And because I was in Scientology, I wasn't permitted to leave. When I was a teenager, they kept me there until I pretty much decided to stay. So when I'm now 27 years old, a little behind the power curve for usually enlisting in the military, I decided to do that. So it was kind of starting with not a whole lot. And I got myself going on that, and I've had a very successful military career. And more recently was able to reconnect with my mother. So from the point I left in 2003 up until 2021, she and I had fallen out of contact with one another because when a person leaves Scientology, they're kind of put on a bad guy list. Scientology doesn't like them and then makes their members disconnect from them because we're considered suppressive persons because we have a differing viewpoint on the way we should be living our lives. As such, I fell out of contact with Rosemary, my mother, and we weren't able to see each other. The only times that I was able to see her was at a funeral for my grandmother, her mother. I saw her briefly, and other than that, there was very little interaction. In 2021, I was notified by one of my uncles that my mom was in the intensive care unit in a hospital close to the big Scientology base in Hollywood, and that she was expected to pass away. They said she had a stroke. She wasn't doing well. So I expected that would be the last time I would get a chance to see her. There was one other time that I was able to kind of see her under similar circumstances in the hospital. And that was back in 2011 when she had to have heart surgery. And I, went through all sorts of contortions. I was in Afghanistan on a deployment at the time, and my chain of command was able to let me travel back to the United States so that I could be there with her a couple days while she was in the hospital before she went back into the care of the people she was working with in the Sea organization. So in 2021, now kind of fast forwarding, now I think that this is our goodbyes, and I go out there just to see her. It's during COVID, so getting in and out of hospitals it was a lot of fun at the time. Lots of restrictions. But I find out when I went out there that she didn't have a stroke. She was just very badly dehydrated and had pneumonia. She didn't really receive follow-up care while working in Scientology for her heart condition, and had pretty much been worked almost to death. We were expecting her to pass away. She was in and out of the intensive care unit for about 45 days. During this time, she was still working for Scientology, in that they had complete control of her her legal affairs, like they were her powers of attorney, and I didn't really have any rights or ability to help her, and she wasn't in the mindset of thinking that she wanted to leave. So she was eventually placed in hospice in Glendale, and when she was in hospice, had been able to get like a Samsung tablet that was one of these Amazon Fire.
Right.
Yeah, one of those. And she started surfing the internet. So she's looking for all the great things that Scientology was providing to the world, as all these Sea Org members are being told. And she started to find very much the opposite of that. So she ended up sending me an email, which at first I was like, they don't have emails, and she would never write to me. I wasn't sure if I would ever hear from her again, but she started to slowly communicate with me, and I started helping her find information online where she's able to see stories that people she personally knew had shared. A good example of that is all the Jeff Hawkins sharing his story on Leah Remini's Scientology and the Aftermath with that she did with Mike Rinder. That whole series, the 3 seasons of it, she watched all of those things.
Wow.
She read Leah's book, and then she read Jenna Miscavige's book. And strangely enough, she actually took care of Jenna when she was young, because she was a secretary for Ronnie Miscavige.
Right.
So slowly she got deprogrammed. In her story, there's a lot of different abuse that she was subjected to while working for Scientology that was horrific. But when she became an elder, over the age of 65, started receiving Social Security payments, they started really collecting money from her through all sorts of illegal schemes, opening credit cards in her name, running up other people's credit cards and making her pay them back, taking money from her directly while she was working for them for services that she should have been receiving as part of their counseling as a matter of her employment. And they were just taking money because they needed the money for the week's statistics. All told, this is while she gets paid about $50 a week, or sorry, yeah, $50 a week. That's really all they get paid. They kind of live communally, and it's, sort of this religious brotherhood, or however they think about it. But the idea is you're supposed to reap the benefits of everything Scientology is trying to offer to the world. And I really thought that she was in a location doing something that she loved, and that she was being taken care of, and she was happy doing it. And her First Amendment rights were important to me. Of course, I wanted to be in contact with her, but she was the one that decided to kind of be out of contact with me based off of the Scientology rules of disconnection. So when I slowly start finding out about all of these things that are unraveling, while she is also starting to realize that, hey, I was lied to all of these years, and finding out the truth of what actually was going on. She got to the point of watching the documentary Going Clear. There was,
Wow.
and then that was the thing, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was like, because at that point she was still convinced that L. Ron Hubbard was still good, and that all of the things that were going on were despite what he wanted. And that helped her kind of realize that this guy is in fact selling, just a bunch of lies. And now that's just being perpetrated forward, even though he's already passed. So she, at that point, would realize, like, I don't want to be here. But she's in a convalescent home, well, actually in hospice, but she's slowly starting to recover. She's now on oxygen. She's seeing a cardiologist and a pulmonologist. She's starting to get better. And if she got better to a certain point, the fear was they would move her out of that and move her back under a little bit more direct control, where she wouldn't have the freedoms to talk to me and be able to leave.
Right.
So long story short, and there's quite a bit of details to it, which you can find on my channel. And I've talked to, I'm sure some of your audience has already heard it, but through the help of the Aftermath Foundation and some very close friends, we were able to help her escape and got her moved out of there. She's now in a very good place, very safe, living close to me in a very upscale assisted living facility where she's being properly taken care of the way that she should be. And a lot of help, both physical and monetary, came from the Aftermath Foundation in order to help cover those expenses, because anyone who's had to deal with senior living needs, it is very expensive. And that's not something that I was financially in a position to be able to help her with. But the foundation, just without question, was instantly there to help us in every way that we needed it. So we got her there and we were able to get her legal representation. And as soon as we started trying to have a dialogue with Scientology through the lawyers, which they refused to talk to her after many efforts that she made, they realized the extent of the crimes that they had committed, and they almost threw money back at her, like the money that they had taken, and even things that were hard to prove. Just they're almost terrified because they know just how insidious what they were doing was. And anyway, there's a lot to that, but that is probably in a nutshell the story that I'm trying to share. And what's unique to my mother is her story, but the actual occurrence of what's happening there is being perpetrated on many other elderly. So a lot of the people I grew up with, their mothers and fathers and, my friends and people that were older than me that I worked with are now, getting older, and there is no plan in that organization to take care of elderly people.
Right.
They're taking their money and they're working them to death. And I was fortunate enough to be able to help my mother and to reconnect with her, but there's so many other people that are not. And so I'm kind of blowing the whistle on this. So I'm, sharing the story everywhere that I can. One thing I found about the internet is, though you can go and search things all the time, unless you're having an active dialogue about things, it seems like the internet and news media and things of that nature have a very short memory. So if I can continue to share this, the goal is to help those who are unable to help themselves because of their age, their physical limitations, the situation that they're in. And even if they don't leave, I want Scientology to know loud and clear that we know the things that were done to these people and they need to make it better.
Right.
So.
Right. And we're here to support you and telling that story. And you're now a part of a community that really cares. You mentioned the mainstream news and so forth. And there's certain stories like this, they're never going to get the coverage, but because of the advent of YouTube and so forth, these smaller stories that are hugely important, that greatly affect people's lives, can actually get some exposure. And while we're at that, before we move on, let me just bring up, this is Mike's channel, Mike Brown. You can find him at Mike Brown 101. So please go to his channel and subscribe. It's important that we spread the story, not just for his mom, but for all the other elderly Sea Org members that are out there. So there you go. There you have it. Thanks, Mike. So
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So in respect to our discussion today, now, what years was that when you said you were at the internet? When did you start at the international biz? You started at the ranch. What year was that?
So,
I'm trying to get a fix.
So to give a timeline, I think we got to Los Angeles around 1987, 88 timeframe. It's right around the time where the Dianetics campaign,
right, and that's when
very popular one, was started blowing up. And that was, and originally my mother, after she got through her initial Scientology Sea Org boot camp, worked as a secretary for their marketing executive, a gentleman named Ronnie Miscavige, who is David Miscavige's older brother, who was in charge of the marketing unit at the time. And that was Central Marketing Unit. It was located in the big blue building on the third floor, I believe.
No, I think it was the second floor. I think it was, the second floor. The artists were on the sixth floor. And then
they were up in like the top of the building, and then down lower was the actual, one of the wings was Central Marketing down there.
Yeah, where Ronnie Miscavige was, and Jeff Hawkins was, and Carolyn Mustard.
Bill Dendu.
Yeah, Bill
all the
Denduke.
artists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Carrie Cook and
Hmm.
some other people. Um, yeah, so that's when I met Rosemary. Was when I think I probably went to work on the Dynetics campaign just before she came there, because you said it was.
You worked on that with Jeff Hawkins,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
You
yeah. I
were
did all the
instrumental in
TV
that.
ads. Well, I did all the ones,
Okay.
the ones that everybody remembers. Yeah, and so I didn't interact with Ronnie a lot because he was pretty hands off in terms of my participation. And he
Mhm.
always seemed to me super on the surface to be a nice guy. He didn't have at least like, I don't know what he was like across the whole sphere of his existence, but in terms of our day-to-day interactions, he didn't make me feel uncomfortable the way Miscavige always did, even when I was, quote unquote, Dave's friend, and I was in
Yeah, I
good
would
with
agree with
him.
that. He's
Yeah.
he's definitely my remembrance of Ronnie. It's kind of a dichotomy of emotions with him. I can both remember him as my friend's dad, who was
Hmm.
actually quite nice to me, and in general trusted my mother very much, and had her working for him as his secretary for over
Hmm.
a decade.
Hmm.
In terms of the relationship between Ronnie and Dave, and I'm sure Ronnie's going to gets a lot of shit just because of who his brother is, but Ronnie
I
is a
hope
much
so.
kinder person in general, just in the workplace. Like
Right.
he's more charismatic. He's not just a flaming jerk every single time he interacts with someone.
Yeah, he's not there to be the smartest guy in the room to make you feel comfortable. He's not
Yeah.
like Miscavige. Dave is what I call an emotional vampire. So making people, fear them or feel less than him, that sort of feeds his ego, feeds his need. And Ronnie wasn't one of those people.
Well, I
He.
remember like just an interaction with Ronnie, just as you would come in. He's somebody that if you came into a room, you feel comfortable in order to talk. Like, hey,
Yeah.
I can share a conversation with you
Right.
without the fear of immediate retribution.
Right.
Anytime you talk to Dave, you 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 have to so carefully craft what you're going to say, because it doesn't matter what it is, the guy's going to freak out on you. And that was what it was like working for Dave. You're on pins and needles at all times. Ronnie didn't
Yeah.
kind of have that sharp
No.
edge all the time.
Yeah, and mostly Dave didn't require that you said anything. It was, as I discovered when I then ended up at Golden Era Productions working as a director, I discovered that there's three kinds of meetings, right? That CMB Dave would call you into a meeting, right? And when you
Mhm.
were called into a meeting, you were expected, even me, I was hired there as a professional. I wasn't like a Sea Org member.
Yeah.
Even me, like we were expected to hustle, like military style hustle. Like, come on, man, there's a meeting. You're supposed to be there now. It's like if somebody put me on alert that I had a meeting, I would probably go pee every 5 minutes because I wanted to make sure that I didn't have to
You were
pee in the
ready,
middle.
right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're totally ready. But I found out there's three kind of meetings, at least for me, what I experienced. There's what you call a back and forth, where you go in and you're going to talk about something creative and you're going to have this back and forth discussion, right? And that's
Mhm.
very friendly, and you don't take notes ever because it's being recorded, so they don't want you to take notes. The notes just means you're not paying attention, right? Some people take notes because they're nervous. Then the next one is a shut up and sit down and listen meeting, right? And that's
Mhm.
the things are a little tense. You come in, you shut up, you sit down, you listen. The third meeting is I didn't know the Valley of Death had a conference table. And those are really ugly. Those are the ones where people got smacked around. So,
Yeah.
anyways, sorry to take your
I
time with
was
that,
in
but
s
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
go
in
ahead,
no,
Mike.
I was in some of all 3 of those meetings, because when I ended up, working at the international base, I was first as, sort of, assistant, trying to relate it to a more corporate structure. So basically a deputy, that's, a production officer. I was called an organizing officer, where you go around and make sure people are getting things done.
Right, right.
But kinda working as a second in command to, one of the executives to go and enforce their orders.
Which
And I was
who? I'm sorry. Whose org officer were you? I'm curious.
So, I initially, when I was at Golden Era, had right after the studio renovations, Studio 1 and 2,
Oh
I
yeah.
was out at the ranch working there, and I was coming to the base doing renovations, and they were doing a big reorganization. I was made Steve Willett's
Oh
organizing
sure.
officer
Okay.
when
Yeah,
he
that
was
was.
when he was in charge of estates, and then he
Right.
became the commanding
Right.
officer of gold.
Right.
And he took me up to that position with him.
Right. And that was when, just so you guys know, when Mike refers to studio one, two, he's talking about audio studios, not film studios. They have two very, very robust music studios at Gold where they do music recording and mixing for films. That's what he's referring to.
Yeah, and then the final mixes. And anyway, these studios are state of the art. I mean, most of the stuff they make is, and I'm sure some of these are probably aged out a little bit. But I bet they've updated them. But
oh no, they have in Studio One, they have they have a mix board built by a guy named George Massenberg, and I think there's only 4 of them in the world, and it's continuously updated. But there's guys in the music business that would literally kill to have that mix board. That thing is, it was that
amazing.
Stuff is, none of that stuff is aged out. I mean, what's aged out? This is a random trajectory, but it's what's aged out are the uniforms of the Class 5 orgs. Okay, those are totally aged.
The stewardess look.
Yeah, it's everybody says that they look. But I'll let you in a little inside dope on that. Everybody says they look like, in-flight uniforms. Okay, so they were designed. I'm trying to think of his name. I'll look it up. His first name is Richard. He's a very noted fashion designer. The most recent job he'd done before he was hired by the church was he had designed the uniforms for Delta Airlines. So
there you go.
People are not wrong when they look at those. But it always,
I mean, they look business professional.
Yeah, but they also look hospitality.
That's true. And I think that's probably a look that they were going after as opposed to
completely. They were going after a professional hospitality look. But the thing is I looked at this recently. The costume, I keep calling them costumes. I don't know. It's because it's almost Halloween. I'm a film guy, or they're like cosplay because the Sea Org is all about cosplay, Navy, cosplay hospitality. It's just
which I've learned is a bit of an insult to cosplayers because they're very
you're right.
That just want to have fun.
But if you're having you're right. You have right. But if you're cosplay, right. Go ahead, Mike.
I caught some flack. Which is hard not to do because you're sharing that. But I referenced the Sea Org fake Navy thing as kind of like the LARPing, the live action role playing. And I had to tone that down. And I have a cousin that's very much into that too. She's like, really, did you say that just because I dressed up and went to the Ren Fair this weekend? And I love the Ren Fair. And I realized that is very unfair to people that are just having a good time to try to, but I'm just trying to find a parallel.
Yeah, I know. I know we're way off on some tangent now.
Yeah,
but I'm going to defend you, okay, on that statement. And I'm telling you because it's a different, like cosplaying because you're going to the big Comic-Con so you can prey on children is one thing. Cosplaying because it truly is a way of rejoicing in the pop culture of, comics is a different thing, okay? Yeah. So they both are cosplay, but one is predatory. And I think we could say that what the church engages in is, let's just give it a brand new name, predatory cosplay. Okay, so
there you go.
At least it's differentiated. I have to tell you something funny. I think I might have told you on the phone that when you guys did the stream about the military, you and Sterling did a stream about
with Aaron.
Contrasting and comparing military uniforms and so forth. Carolyn Mustard, I was talking to her on the phone, and she said, when I first got in the Sea Org, they used to send us to the Navy surplus store to get part of our uniform. So, like that is
there's that
wrong in so many ways.
Right there on Fountain Avenue. It was on Fountain, I think. Yeah, there was this little crappy military surplus store right next to Peter Gillam's, just down the road from the parking structure and stuff. Anyway, and they would have like just the cheapest military looking uniforms and like members only jackets with epaulets, and it was like super cheesy.
Yeah, and people would buy uniforms. Yeah, just to give you some context, Fountain Avenue and so forth, where Mike's referring to, that would be like next door to the big blue building. So this was in that neighborhood. Like this was their strip mall, right? The Scientology strip mall was basically vitamins, CalMag, and Navy surplus. Anyway. Let's get back on.
So I think we were kind of talking about, the relationship when you were on the Dianetics campaign, but interaction with Ronnie.
Right, right.
and how that contrasted with Dave so much.
Yeah, and it definitely did. I was just, people talk about nature nurture, right?
Hmm.
And it's just like those guys. They were well. I mean, I had a brother, an older brother, who was a bit troubled, and people would say we were nothing alike. So I know what you can have siblings who are absolutely nothing alike, but you couldn't imagine two brothers being more different than
Hmm.
Dave and Ronnie. They were just incredibly different, from my perspective. Um,
Yeah.
and Rosemary, I saw her probably every day I went down there. I mean, I wasn't there every day. I would there multiple times a week for meetings or whatever, because I was doing TV ads, so I was spending time at video houses and on the set shooting. Although a lot of stuff we did was post production, because the questions ads, which were our biggest success, they were all post production. There was no shooting or anything involved.
Right.
Those were just made at a video house. But I would interact with Rosemary a lot, and I have to tell you, and I mentioned this to you the other day, but I really want to stress this. Rosemary was such a sweet person. She was literally the kind of person that would sort of brighten your day when you talk to her, and
Hmm.
but her personality, it had the effect, which unintended effect by her, of sort of normalizing Scientology, sort of normalizing the Sea Org. Because, if you were having a day when it's like, this sucks, I don't like this, and
Hmm.
you interacted with Rosemary, you would think, yeah, but it's okay with her, so it must just be me, because she was always such a kind of a bright, sunny person. She was always, her uniform was always perfect, her hair was always, her scarf was always in the right place,
Yeah.
and she was really memorable. Like there's a lot of people from that period that I have to bang my head against the wall to even get a glimpse of who they were, but she's certainly not one of them.
Yeah. And I think that the and this is an interesting point to highlight. So many people get into Scientology because originally it had kind of this counterculture. It had this thing of like, kind of a free spirited approach to,
Absolutely.
self help. Like you're going to find that the majority of people that get into Scientology, probably 99.9% of them, are some of the best people you will ever meet. They
Yeah.
want the world to be a better place,
Right.
and they were sold a bill of goods telling them that this is the way it's going to
Right.
happen.
Right.
And I think Claire Headley put it in a way that I really love, that the days are long but the years are short, and you just kind of
Oh yeah.
you're just chewing
Yeah.
through today, and before you know it, years and years and decades start to pass by, and you just kind of are stuck in a situation, and it's
Yeah.
now your life. But so many people that I worked with, similar to my mom, and I think she's an excellent example of that, were just such good natured people, that they would, kind of make the day a little bit easier to get through. But another aspect of the Scientology experience, in the Sea organization, Scientology as a public, I assume, was very much similar, is there's no such thing as this sort of nuanced interaction that we're having right now. You're not able to get on and share an opinion and to get
No.
somebody else's counter opinion and kind of argue something out and to come to a mutual understanding. Like you can't bitch. You can't, they call it nattering. You can't bring up a disagreement, because then they'll try to pin it on you as something wrong with you. And there's
Right.
just something fundamentally wrong with that. So that, coupled with such nice people that are there, it gives you this internal perspective of these thoughts that you're having about things not quite being right. Um, it makes you think that it's you.
Right.
So, and then, so yeah, Rosemary worked for Ronnie for a number of years, and she was a very dedicated. She's one of these people that absolutely, she loves taking care of other people. So
Right.
she took care of, obviously all of the work stuff, but then when there was the opportunity to, take care of the kids, and most of us were out at the ranch, she would, kind of be going almost as a proxy, for the parents at times if they couldn't get off, to take care of Jenna, take care of
Right.
Justin, Sterling, like grab the kids, bring them home so that the parents are able to see them a little bit more. And I was able to kind of tag along. I always joke that it seems like the aristocracy or the royalty of Scientology between the Hubbards and the Miscaviges reminds me of a Game of Thrones. It's just
Yeah,
so complicated and like everything's pointing
yeah,
different directions.
yeah. No,
And I,
except for the power struggle, really, because once Dave took over, that
yeah,
was it.
then it was
But
over.
in
But
terms of the intricacy of the familiar relationships,
mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that was how, like, because you almost have to, like, you need to graph this out in order to make it make sense.
Oh
But
yeah, I mean, when I think about who Sterling's, I hope this doesn't sound offensive, but when I try to think in my mind, okay, now who's his parents, who raised him, my brain
yeah,
creeps a little bit.
so yeah, his mother's, Biddy and
Right,
Foster, but then he
right,
was raised by Foster and Barbara, and
right,
then Biddy and Ronnie raised Justin, his twin brother,
right,
and so he
right,
was Tompkins, Justin was Miscavige, but they're
right.
both Tompkins. Like, you got to, like, you're like, we need to. But
Yeah,
then
and
Jen is their half
I,
sister. Anyway,
yeah,
it's craziness.
I always thought Barbara was his mom. Like
Yeah.
I just until recently, I always thought that. I would have argued with you about it because
Well, and
I knew them both. But when Barbara was a CS and case supervisor
mhm,
at the Advanced Org of Los Angeles, and the time period you're speaking about when I met your mom, when she was working with Ronnie, Foster was kind of over that whole thing. I don't remember his role, but he was definitely
he
involved. He
was in
was a
Incom.
yeah. I thought he was
Mhm.
at Bridge. I mean, I get
He was either
uh,
Incom or Bridge. I know
yeah,
he
but
was instrumental in the establishment of Incom.
100%.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that and he was instrumental in getting the Dianetics campaign going, which that Dianetics campaign is the reason Scientology grew into the 90s
yeah,
and almost had a chance to get big enough to survive forever, like the Mormons
mhm,
did,
right,
until Miscavige came along and just like, set the whole thing on fire. It just burned it down.
sure.
But yeah, Foster he had a huge role, more so than people know.
Yeah, he was, and again, of an excellent example of a amazingly good-natured individual that will do anything to try to
Right,
help the world in the way he
right.
thinks that he is, and that is so unique. And like, he'll work for nothing is what these people do. So, but I think so. That's when you first met my mom,
Mhm.
and then I know eventually she was. Well, they posted Ronnie, meaning he was assigned to a
Well,
more senior executive position, right?
I'll tell you the backstory, which I recently
Okay.
found out from
Hmm.
Carolyn Mustard. The reason why all of a sudden everybody went up to Int. I don't know if you're aware of it, but what happened was we were having incredible success. The Dianetics book, from the day it was released in May of 1950 till whenever that was, when I got called in on it or asked, brought in to work on it, it had sold 3 million copies. That's abysmal. That's the worst performance you can imagine. And it even suffered one period where Hubbard even no longer owned the copyrights, and then that got sorted out. He
Right.
was able to buy it back uh, after he went bankrupt originally, but whatever. So then, between whenever it was 86 or something, I got to go on with Jeff sometime and figure this out.
Hmm.
It was the mid 80s, 86, 87, something like that. Um, I got brought in, and I don't know if Ronnie was there yet. I think it might have been he might have been out of the Sea Org because he was brought back by his brother to play that role, to have that particular job.
Hmm.
So meanwhile, up at the base, they were desperately trying to make films and do marketing. They were trying to do everything that Hubbard said. They had a film crew, they had a marketing department. They had no marketing up there. All of marketing was in LA. And so now LA is just explodes success wise. All of a sudden,
Hmm.
in a few short years, we sell 10 million books. And the book legitimately gets on the bestsellers list, not like later when they do these buybacks and they do all these
Yeah.
tricky manipulations to get it.
Manipulations. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was on the New York Times bestsellers list legitimately twice. First time 1950, second time in like mid 80s, 88, something like that. And so then this all of a sudden Miscavige decides one day these guys need to come to Gold. They up to Int. They need to stop working with outside professionals like me. There was another guy named Rick Rogers who'd been a creative director at Leo Burnett, one of the biggest agencies in the world. He was a Scientologist. We had a gal who was a Scientologist named Jan Gildersleeves. She was a media buyer, and she was the
Hmm.
one that figured out that cable was a brand new medium and that you could buy ads on it cheap and nobody
Yeah.
was. So
And I
she,
remember Jeff talking about that and like, let's get on to this. And it was
yeah,
pioneering at that
it
point, right?
was a brilliant. It was like in 3 years they sold 10 million books because they figured out you could get on cable and it was cheap
Hmm.
and you could do ads. And the people who watch cable at 2 a.m, those are the people that are going to buy the Dianetics book. They're sitting there
Right.
with their credit card on their bedstand and on a bottle of scotch, and they're like miserable. So they're looking for answers. So anyway, meanwhile, up at the base, they're just sucking. Like they can't get films done. So Miscavige orders the entire marketing department up to gold. He and Marty Rathbun and who was it? It was uh, somebody else. It was Norman Starkey. There was like this little program. We're going to make you guys into real Sea Org members. You're going to stop hiring professionals because professionals like me, they represent what they used to call external influence. You remember that, Mike?
Hmm.
That's a really dangerous thing. External
Yeah.
influence.
You might have like a critical thought or an original thought. Like it's
Yeah,
some
or
dangerous shit.
yeah, or you might yeah, that is very true. Or you might be attracted to a different way of doing things than Hubbard said.
Hmm.
So they were like, no more working with professionals. We're going to make you guys into real Sea Org members. If we need to do ads, the Gold Crew can do them. Okay, so like a year and a half later, the Gold Crew is locked up in the galley, scrubbing the grease out of the fryers because they could get nothing done. And now they come to me and start saying, "Hey, would you like to come up to Gold and make a film?" So that's kind of
Yeah.
what happened. That's why they all
So,
ended up there. And so then Rosemary ended up in housekeeping, right? They
well,
had,
originally, so like she
yeah,
did,
not originally,
so originally she ended up because she was already working with Ronnie, and when they moved, so this is kind of to recap the way that what you said is there was a tremendous amount of success with the way that it was being done with the marketing campaign in Los Angeles,
right?
and it was so successful that they had to stop doing it
Yeah,
and to
exactly,
do something completely different,
right,
which is the dumbest shit. Did like what? Like if you have something that's going right, why would you do that? But anyway, R- Ronnie ends up moving up to this higher level. He goes into an echelon of international management called senior executive strata. They have all these
right,
different functions like books, marketing, gross income, all these different people, and they're supposed to do analysis of these things. And they're wear commander stripes, and they work under the executive
right,
director international Guillaume Leserve,
right,
and they're supposed to kind of have a line into all these organizations to do all these great things and make it all expand. So
right.
with that, he moves up to that Golden Arrow Productions property, and Rosemary goes with him. And at this time, myself, Justin, Sterling, Jenna, Taryn, who Mike Render's children, Taryn and
Mhm,
Benjamin, we were
mhm.
all still down in Los Angeles,
Right,
and a lot of other kids, like all of the children that our parents who worked at that base, and there were probably 80 or 90 of us. We
right,
were just down in LA,
right,
like hanging out with other families, and our parents were like a 2-hour drive away up at Golden Arrow Productions. We didn't even know where that physically was because it was all confidential. And anyway, so we end up moving up there eventually to this ranch along with all of the other kids. But Rosemary then was continuing to work for Ronnie. And while Ronnie was definitely different than his brother, Ronnie was in this, to kind of, and I know some people have been, probably wondering like, well, what ended up with Rosemary's situation on how things got worse. When she worked for Ronnie, he was really engaged in things which would be considered, sexual assault in the workplace,
right,
inappropriate
right,
touching, and things of this nature. Now, no one knew that, but RTC, the Religious Technology Center, eventually found out about it when they were interrogating Ronnie, and and then they ended up punishing Rosemary for it. And then Ronnie was probably in some degree of trouble, but he went back to his job, and
right,
Rosemary was punished. She was restricted to that base, and then kind of put down into a lower job down in Golden Arrow Productions, working as a housekeeper, and she was in
right.
housekeeping, and she would take care of the VIPs, and that's where you kind of ran into her. This was an interesting topic because I talked about this last night in terms of the relationship of this abuse, and because it's very like it's very emotionally charged. It's emotionally charged for me. It is for Rosemary. And she and I were talking yesterday, and I shared this with Claire and Amy on the live that they had me on yesterday. So with respect to, and I've seen my mother working through this, she told me that she never thought she'd be able to admit or tell me the reason why she had gotten in trouble. And like when she was then put in the situation, if she was responsible for these things happening, even though it was non-consensual and she was very much in a junior position, people are outraged by that. And
Right.
I completely get it. And that's definitely Ronnie's shit that he'll have to sort out in terms of the perception people have on him. And I know that I'm kind of dragging the guy a little bit, and I rightfully so, but the reason why I share it isn't necessarily as much about him as the abuser, which that is its own very important aspect of this, but it's the responsibility of, so you have these people working in a church, and Rosemary was there as a worker in this organization, and such a thing happened with an executive, and the church's or corporation's response to this whole thing was to victimize the victim.
Right.
And that is the abuse she suffered as a result of that is in many ways way worse than what happened when it was going on, even though that I don't want to downplay that at all.
Right.
And this is,
Right.
I kind of feel like I'm walking a fine line trying to even explain this. But
Well, yeah, I mean, it's understandable because we're talking about somebody who was loved and important and important to some people, but in one part of his life made some mistakes that were damaging to other people.
correct.
So it's always a difficult subject to breach. People are
Yeah,
complicated. Nobody's
people
just
are.
one thing, except David Miscavige, which is he's a sociopath and a narcissist. He's one of the
I would
rare
agree.
people that is just one thing. I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, that's 100% true. So when mom was talking to me about this, she said, aside from working through the actual just, shame and guilt and all that, being able to talk about it, she also didn't want to talk about it because of fear of retribution from Scientology, but also fear that her talking about this would hurt people she cared about.
Right.
For instance, she very much loves Jenna. She remembers Jenna when she was a little girl, and then Jenna ended up, kind of having her own story, and she has an absolutely amazing book that she has out where she talks about her childhood, her teen years, and her whole escape story from Scientology. She didn't want to downplay anything by adding any of this into it. And that's
Right.
kind of why I'm harping on a point, because people need to be able to interact like on this platform and be able to share openly about their interactions with other people, regardless of if the specific nuance has anything to do with another person's story. So for
Right.
instance, if somebody's talking and they're talking about marketing and Ronnie Miscavige comes up, that has nothing really necessarily to do with Rosemary's situation. If Jenna is sharing her story, which I absolutely want Jenna to have, a platform and a voice to be able to share her experiences, because they're very important for her to share. She also needs to know that she has the safety and security to be able to share what she has to say from her perspective.
Right.
Because do you think like any of his family knew that shit happened? Like, I didn't know, like, and then the church knew, and then these two people were Ronnie was kind of penalized but sent back to work, and Rosemary was kind of shunned away in disgrace, and eventually went to their thought rehabilitation camp, the RPF, for 6 years. 6 years. That's like a prison sentence.
And
And
when I heard
that's some
that,
shit living.
Mike, when I heard that, I literally started to cry. And having known her and imagining her being on the RPF,
Yeah.
it's just, I was frozen. I was so stunned when I heard that.
But she was down there. She was down there with, a lot of people from Gold. Caroline was on the RPF with her at the same
Right,
time. Caroline
right,
Mustard. And
right.
these are people, like, some of the most dedicated people that will work tirelessly,
Total idealists.
tossed out like garbage.
Yeah.
Because of,
Carolyn was
I don't know.
instrumental in selling those 10 million books. And now
Mhm.
she's doing whatever, scraping the crud out of dumpsters.
Right. Yeah. And, and meanwhile, this woman is an absolute powerhouse, and she gets out into the world. she can't help but to be successful, like Caroline specifically. And that's the same of everyone who is, treated like crap there. When we go out, it's like, hey, we're good people. We can be successful in our own way. And I think there's many examples of that.
Right.
So,
Oh yeah, for sure.
so I think the conversation about these things is, not to just, beat on Scientology, but really the organization. And I used a bit of an analogy yesterday, and it maybe was a good one, maybe not. The military, obviously, and corporations in general, all have a policy on what you're going to do about what if you have, sexual violence or sexual harassment in the workplace. What do you do? So there's at least a program in place. Now, there's times where that program has failed and people have not been properly taken care of. But the organization, the way the organization responds to those failures is just as important as having a program in the first place. That way they can adapt the program, make it more important, make sure that there are lines for people to have advocates to be able to speak out and not have retribution against them.
Right. So
that
you're saying,
one aspect.
yeah, you're saying at least they have it in policy. The policy may not always be followed, but it's in written policy. It's in, like this example, military code.
Yeah, they have a program in place. So if it's not followed and then something then happens, at least there's recourse and action, and for every example where it's probably good, there's probably an example where it wasn't done properly. And you could say the same about a news corporation that has had the same sort of thing happen. If any major, I'm sure Google has a policy against what they're going to do with a lot of people that work together. And then, if you have something bad happen, what do you do? The point is, does an organization have a plan that consists of what are we going to do to protect people in the workplace? Because they're responsible for people that work for them. They have these people like dedicating their time and being paid next to nothing and are living on their premises. Like, are they going to make sure that these programs are in place to make sure that they're safe? And if the programs are not in place, which in the C organization, they don't exist. You have the knowledge reports policies. You have some of their like, hey, if you speak out against us, you're a suppressive person. There's not a mechanism for a person to say, hey, this happened to me, I need help, and not fear that they're going to be in trouble as a result of it.
Right.
So with that, we want to, the point being, people need to be able to have nuanced conversation on YouTube. They need to be able to have it and not everything be, kind of chicken picked in terms of like, oh, is this a big deal? I want, anyone to be able to talk about Ronnie. Does Ronnie need to own his own shit? Yes, he does. But really the point is an organization on the way that they don't care for somebody, that I think is what the problem is persisting in the present time for a lot of people who are still there.
Right. So. Yeah, it's sometimes, Mike, I think about the ending apartheid in South Africa, and when Mandela became president, they had what's called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, where they said to people, "Look, if you honestly come forward and you actually divulge all of your crimes, we'll forgive you." It was controversial because there were some horrific crimes that were uncovered and people got away. But at least everybody was able to get closure. People were able to find out where the bodies were, what happened to their loved ones. And, sometimes I think some of us need to have a little bit of a truth and reconciliation.
Well, I feel the same way about myself. And I'm sure you feel the same way too. Like, we were involved in something for the best reasons, and due to the climate, have undoubtedly have interactions with people that, if looking back at them, you feel ashamed of the way you probably treated people.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I don't, because believe it or not, I know this is terrible to say. I was not a bad guy there. What my guilt comes from being like a B-52 pilot who carpet bombed a village. I never looked at any of them in the eye, but I helped to drop propaganda on entire populations that, like Apostate Alex, who I've become very good friends with. He said, Mitch, you're the reason I got into Scientology, because of those ads and the da-da-da. So
that is a burden to have to deal with that.
Yeah, but I was
being able to come out and talk about it. There's got to be some healing there too. That's how it feels for me, being able to talk through these things.
Well, I did this in 2014. I helped to produce a video and I was interviewed in it. I was probably extensively appeared in it more than anybody else. It was one of their, look at us, we're going to pull the covers off ourselves and we're going to be transparent. It was called Inside Golden Era Productions. It's still on YouTube. And while that was going on, the hole was happening, like within 100 yards and I suggest you go to my channel and watch it. It's called The True Story of the Church of Scientology's production, whatever. You'll find it. It's one of the only 2 videos I did because everything else is live. But within 100 yards of where all the interviews were shot for that, the hole was going on. And the whole, everybody at Gold knew about it. I mean, it was sure, it was Dave's prison, but it was a Gold op. It was run by security. Everybody knew about it. You know, the qualification division, which are there to take care of the staff, they knew about it. So, so I recorded that video and put myself in a window and I talked people through it. And like, I made myself accountable and I said, this is what's happening. Right. So, and that was kind of scary to me. I didn't speak out for a while because there's people at Gold I really care about. I was able to buffer the crew from a lot of bad stuff. And like you and I have talked about, sometimes you're not fighting for the ideology of the nation. You're fighting for the guy next to you in the trench.
That's totally true.
Yeah. So you care about these people. And so I didn't really want to speak out at first because I care about them. Like, why should I spit in their ice cream? You know, they have a right to live however they want to live. And then you realize, you know, and this is my message to people who are under the radar. I'm not trying to evaluate you, but sometimes you have to make that hard decision and you have to step out and you have to speak out because that very potentially will bring the day closer where your loved ones and your friends can also get out if you speak out, although you may have to go through a very difficult period of being disconnected from them and whatever, because if you don't do that, you're just forestalling the inevitable. So anyway, we're talking about holding ourselves accountable, and that's about all I have to say on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, like, I'm coming up on 20 years since I left. It's actually next week is going to be the 20-year to the day anniversary of October 17th, 20 years ago, when I like left and didn't have anything and kind of starting my life from scratch. And I have something that I'm very proud of now. I really feel like I'm doing the thing that I love. I have a wonderful family and I have nothing but feel like accomplished things within that 20-year period that I'm actually proud of. But when I look back at the stuff before and I saw people like, you know, really some of the first ones that started speaking out, aside from like the ones that were literally the pioneers of these things. But Mark and Claire had, you know, a lot of momentum, and Mark wrote his book, and that's kind of my generation, who my contemporaries would be when they started speaking out. And I remember as seeing these things slowly evolve, and then the Aftermath show coming out, and then Mike Rinder coming out. When Mike Rinder came out, it was like, whoa, because I knew Mike, like he was he was my friend's dad. Like I remember growing up and Mike was the executive there. And I had a similar, because the first person that actually told me that you left was Roanne. And she said, Mike, Mitch left. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
I was never supposed to leave. Remember, Mike? I was one of those guys that he'll never leave.
Oh, I was convinced, like, you know, even though you were in this weird thing, and I know you've talked a lot about this, you couldn't be deeper in if you wanted to, but at the same time, you had a bit of they did some information control on what you were shown. But you also had unbelievable inside access to things that no one else would really have. And I remember she told me that, and I'm like, is he going to start speaking out? And she's like, I'm not sure, he might at some point. And I'm just like, oh, this is huge. So the fact you're doing that, I don't know if people understand the significance that you've had in that organization. Like you have like Mike Rinder knows all that OSA stuff. You know, all their marketing stuff at the same level.
And the Gold organizational stuff.
Right. It is unbelievably interesting to me. The magnitude of people like you and people like Mike Rinder coming out. So for me, watching these things happen, like as Mike and Leah are doing these, and I see, you know, people that I know starting to share their story, it was this pain inside of me, like, oh, I've got to speak out on this, but my mother was there. And I'm like, I'm not going to do anything that's going to speak against, even though I'm a declared suppressive person, speak against her, that's going to make her situation anything other than what she wants it to be. I literally had it in my mind that she wanted to be there, even though I knew that I couldn't stand the place. I knew she was now working down in Los Angeles. I thought that she was happy, and I couldn't have been more of an idiot to think that now in hindsight, looking back. But that, I feel, is a lot of people are in this situation of like, I don't want to take that step to us take a step back from all this and say no, because they're scared of who they're going to lose. Their loved ones, in some respect, are very much weaponized against them in order to control the thought, because they just don't want that pain of the loss. And I think that is key. No one's sharing these thoughts. Probably a lot of people are having them. I'm not going to say everyone, because I think that I have no way to prove that, but a lot of people must be feeling and sensing the same thing. And if just more people would say, you know what, this isn't for me, I don't like what's going on, even if they still kind of believe in Scientology, but they don't believe in the bullshit that's going on with it, and just said no, I think that, they might experience a time of loss, but more than likely their loved ones are going to leave too at some point. That's what I really hope, because I want other people to experience getting their families back. And it's a very hard thing to try to solve, because most of them are in this mindset of thinking that they're stuck there and that they are in the right place. And if they just had a little bit of separation from that and are able to think clearly and able to kind of, think for themselves without constantly being, kind of fed this line of what to think and how to think, that they'd probably make other decisions. So I agree with you. It's a hard thing to do, but I respect you very much for doing it.
Yeah,
and I'm
thank
excited
you.
to see what you're going to do. So
Yeah, I'm going to do more. Well, I have a book coming out,
yeah.
which is almost done. We're going to try to get it out. I'm going to try to get it not just on Amazon, but into stores sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And believe it or not, do you remember the film, Mike? Do you remember the sci-fi film Independence Day?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you remember when the aliens were showing up and somebody
Mm-hmm.
said, I think it was Jeff Goldblum said, they're using our satellites against us. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's us. Okay.
Yeah,
We are
that's
those
true.
satellites, because now
Yeah,
you've
we're
got,
hopping on their signal.
yeah, we're hopping. Thank you. We're hopping on their signal, because we've got me and Jeff Levin, who's done music for me, and we've got Carolyn Mustard, and we've got Carrie Cook, a very talented designer, who we all knew at from the old Dianetics days and from the Int Base. She was probably the most successful designer up there.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of us were like working on projects where all of them are helping me with my book and with marketing, and it's like crazy. That whole team, they're jumping on. So yeah, we're getting
Yeah.
on their signal. When I left, when I finally made the decision, because for me it was just a slow motion train wreck that was
Mm-hmm.
accelerated by COVID. And when I finally stopped interacting, I called Jeff. We spoke because we were dear old friends, and I hadn't talked to him in whatever long, decades. And then I called him because I wanted Mike Rinder's number. He
Mm-hmm.
got me in touch with Mike. And then I called Mike. We spoke on the phone for 3 hours, and he said, "You have no idea how much power you have because of what you did for the church. You can now do it against them." But at that time, I wasn't in shape to hear it. I went home. I sat on my couch for a year and a half, and I played Overwatch, like literally. I did nothing but vegetate. And then I was finally able to realize that how much my path forward would be dependent on speaking out. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think people don't realize that. Speaking of Rowan, he mentioned Rowan. That would be L. Ron Hubbard's granddaughter, who was a good contemporary of Mike's and was a dear friend of mine. She worked in painting in the set shop, and she was always like the daughter I never wanted to have. I mean, when I got to see her, when I finally left, it was like a tearful reunion. She's such an amazing person.
Yeah, she's very talented.
I just had to throw that in. Sorry, but
Absolutely. No, she was one of the people who helped me to physically get my mother picked up from the
right,
place she was in Glendale, and actually help us get to the airport and
right,
get out of LA.
right,
Her and Justin, formerly Justin Miscavige, Justin Tompkins,
right.
two of my closest friends in the world, and they were right there with me every step of the way. It was
That's
amazing.
amazing. I know.
Yeah.
It's such a great story. I can't wait for the documentary. Literally.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. I don't want to I don't want to over pump it, but anyway, yeah. So speaking of my book, I just have to do a shameless plug, and then we'll get back to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So hold on a second. Let me just put this up here. So I have. Where did it go? There it is. I have an Indiegogo campaign. We've met the campaign. I basically was raising money for the finishing costs of the book, and now we're continuing on to extend beyond the campaign, the target. So if you to campaign to raise funds for the marketing campaign, because it is my aim to not just get this book on Amazon, but to get it into bookstores. And that takes a little bit of doing, because you really have to convince bookstores by putting a marketing campaign behind it that it's worth them purchasing the book to put in the bookstores. And I've gotten some very serious media reaches, and that coverage will then help convince the bookstores. So if anybody wants to help that campaign, this is absolutely a book the Church of Scientology does not want released, and they don't want people reading this, because this is not about the whole, and it's not about people being physically abused and so forth, but it really is, it amongst many other things, it really unpacks how this con works. This organization is it's a bottomless pit of hypocrisy that manages to take people's idealism and weaponize it against them. And anyway, so I think it's an important book. And it's the reason that I'm writing it, is to hold myself
I'm
accountable.
super excited to. There's going to be so much inside information that no one's probably heard before. I can only imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot of great conversations that happen, and I'm trying not to tell it all on.
Yeah, you got to save some of it.
Yeah, well, there's so much. It's going to be hard. I don't think I possibly could. But so getting back to, okay, so then here's what happened, because we haven't told the whole story yet. So what happens is we all the marketing guys, they disappear up to Gold, and then later I'm invited up there, and I have no idea that the whole place was just a total disaster. And that's a whole nother story, and I've written about it. But more importantly, they built these cottages. They built this little village of cottages, which they called the G's. There was 4 of them were 2-bedroom units, and 1 of them was a 1-bedroom unit. Very nice little units. And when I first went up to Gold, I was living in one of the apartments that the staff lived in by myself. They were like, I don't know, what 4 or 6 to an apartment. I don't remember, like 2 or 3 married couples.
Well, it depends if you were in a 2-bedroom, that would be 3 married couples, because there would be one that would live in the living room. I was chatting with Sterling about it, because he and I were roommates. So my ex-wife and I, we lived in one room. Another couple lived across from us, and then Sterling and his ex-wife Suzette, who's Shelley Miscavige's sister, lived in the living room, and they had put up this, like, the really thin plywood that you use on the sets, that ultra thin.
Yeah, it's called, I forgot the name of it, but it's
like backing board or something. It's just a really,
it's like a veneer.
Right. It's just barely thicker than veneer. It has just enough structure to stand up as long as you connect it to some sort of boards.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the wall of their room, which there's no privacy or soundproofing in here or anything like that. Anyway, that's a whole nother funny story that Sterling and I get into, but this is how we were living. And you must have been in one of those apartments kind of.
Yeah, I was in, I don't remember which complex, but I was in one of those apartments. I was there by myself, but I hated it because I was driving from LA, an hour and a half. And then I was driving about 20 minutes to the apartment from the base, back and forth every day. And it was just all of a sudden, it was insane. It was too much. Yeah. I know I'm being selfish, because obviously I had it way better than the crew had it. So then they finished this little VIP village. I don't know how else to call it. And so then I was the first one to move in there. And then later Danny Sherman moved into one of them. He's another, and then Tom Cruise was then staying there during the time he was there. He was my neighbor for a while. And Rosemary was the housekeeper. So she must have been Tom's housekeeper for a while as well then.
She might have been. I know she was down there for a bit. I don't know if the years where she was, because she was in charge working down there, taking care of those units for about, and this is after the thing with Ronnie happened and she got in trouble. She was then, once she was off of her restriction status that lasted several months, she was put down there as the housekeeper for them. To take care of the celebrities. And it was about a 4.5-year period. There may have been overlap there. I'd have to ask her specifically, but at some point I know that Bonneview had finished and they might have started putting Tom up there when he came.
No. As soon as it was finished
there.
As soon as Bonneview was finished, he was gone from the G's. That we never saw. You'd hardly ever see him. And I think probably most of the time he came up, he was living up at Bonneview, because they had some really spectacular VIP quarters up there.
Just stuff that's just over the top.
Yeah. But so I would see Rosemary all the time because she was my housekeeper. And that seemed to be a pretty decent job, because, you're down there, you're all by yourself. She's working off. There's nobody ordering you around, and you're just taking care of these units. And you have to do some laundry and stuff, but they all had washers and dryers in them, so it was really easy to the job was easy. So yeah, she was just this pleasant person that was like the housekeeper. I'd known her from LA and when she was Ronnie's secretary, and now she was the housekeeper, and it just all seemed so normal. And when you talked about there was some information control on my end, that was definitely like Rosemary going to the RPF, all that kind of stuff would be in that dossier of information control that I was kept from.
Because at one point, you're just said, hey, she's reassigned to somewhere else is probably what you're told.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then someone else is put in there to take care of you guys. And you're busy anyway. So it's not like you have a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah, you don't. You absolutely don't. You're pinned down, man. It's just like the bullets are flying right over your head. You have deadlines. You need to focus on what you're doing. You're not thinking about.
She's told me a lot of stories about both taking care of you. I remember you would be up there. Yeah. Well, you would be up there sometimes, and you would be because they didn't only use you as a director. Sometimes they would have you writing scripts and treatments and all sorts of stuff.
Right.
I think you were, you would be doing that sometimes. She would take care of Danny Sherman, and he was constantly going back and forth between whatever that biography project is, and then writing whatever these Ron mags were and the events. And I always remember Danny as sort of like the friendly uncle that everybody. It was kind of a little bit eccentric.
Yeah.
And Rosemary, she told me that Danny's wife had come up because I think she had a terminal illness and she ended up passing.
Yeah.
And she was still there taking care of him during that time. And then shortly after that, I think is when she ended up in 2004, when she was sent to that PAC RPF, that rehabilitation thought conditioning camp, again for the crimes of the thing that happened with Ronnie.
Right.
But yeah, so my memory of Danny and her memory of Danny was, similar to, Mitch, just kind of this good natured guy. Danny was always kind of his own eccentric self.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that changed a little over time.
Yeah, it did. Danny. Yeah, we were very good friends. The days you're talking about, they're sort of like the halcyon days at Gold, sort of the early 90s. Dave was successful. I think, like, I didn't know it. I came up around January, February 1990, right around the time that he had, beat the crap out of Mark Fisher in the garage. I didn't know about that. Like, that stuff was really just starting when I got up there. And there was me and there was Danny, and we were living in this nice VIP quarters, and we had these great people like Rosemary, and then the other people that were taking care of us were really nice. And it was only like later when things really started to spiral out of control. You left in 2004?
So I left in late 2003, and then Rosemary and then, I think Ronnie and Biddy at this point were already gone in 2003. They had left the Sea Org. But then in 2004, there was like a mass exodus where they kicked people off of that international base in Golden Era Productions, and she got swept up in all of that.
Right. And they sent them to RPF in LA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or they just like kicked them out on the street. Some people.
Some people, they just offloaded them, as they say. What a wonderful term. You can really.
They call it beaching.
Beaching.
Or are you talking the RPF? Yeah.
No. I'm saying offload. Like they have a procedure where you can be fitness boarded out, which they refer to as offloading, right?
Mm-hmm. They do, yeah.
I mean, beaching. I think that's sort of the slang.
A naval, the naval term for it. Like they're going to throw you on a beach, like on a deserted island, and just leave you there.
And I think it comes from the ship. But the terms that I was most familiar with, offloaded. Oh, somebody got offloaded. It means they just got rid of them. But I remember Miscavige saying to me one day, like, "Why do we have an RPF at Gold? Like, it looks bad. Like the optics are bad." So, and the next thing you know, they loaded up a number of buses with people, and they all ended up in the PAC RPF, beating the RPF that was located around the Big Blue building. So it's just like crazy.
Oh, so there's some amazing stories, and she and I have started to kind of catalog these when they were not amazing in that how shocking they are when they were on that RPF and PAC, the living conditions. You're talking about literally hundreds of people that were there, and there might be a 1 or 2 seater toilet for 200 people.
Oh,
and
God.
And it was disgusting. Like some of the stories, I'm like, anyway, prison by comparison in terms of the facilities available to you, even though you probably are restricted by the bars and things around you, and those bars
Right,
are not
right.
physically there, but you still are kind of restricted in a similar manner. Sounds like it was way better equipped than any of the living conditions for these people. And the staff members who weren't in trouble, their living conditions aren't much better than that.
No, yeah, there's no good place to live at PAC, especially back then. So I can't even
Yeah.
imagine what it was like being in the RPF. I mean, it's just, and Hubbard talks about Earth as being a pleasant prison planet. I mean, come on. And then, he does that. So
Yeah.
just
So
just to
strange.
prove that Earth is a prison planet, let me just show you.
Let's double down on it. Yeah.
Terrible. So yeah, Danny became sort of infamous as the official L. Ron Hubbard biographer, and
Mhm.
he used to write speeches for. He used to write all the events. He'd write speeches, all of David Miscavige's speeches, and then he would write these things called the L. Ron Hubbard bio, and then he would get up at international events and do these things. And then after Danny's wife died, he kind of really spiraled, and he himself got very ill and ended up becoming an opioid addict. And it was really, as I said, Scientology is like this bottomless pit of hypocrisy. One example of that was like, Dan Sherman is addicted, the official LRH biographer, he's addicted to opiates. He's doing events high on Oxycontin and pumped up on steroids. And he's giving speeches about all what Scientology does to help the opioid, epidemic. It's just crazy stuff. I mean, eventually he got off. I was asked to kind of be his twin, like his partner in helping him get off of drugs. So, and then he passed away last year. But it was just like, the outcomes that people have. Danny was not a bad guy,
No.
but he raised so much money for the church, and it's just the outcomes people have. I mean, I'm not getting into it now at this point, but my own personal physical health and mental health suffered so badly. It's like your trajectory with that organization, it's never going to be good. There's no good outcome. I talk about the early days at Celebrity Center when I got in, and I was a 23-year-old film school dropout, addicted to heroin, and this small group of wonderful people under Yvonne Jench literally like saved my life. But that was a fluke. That's not something. There's nothing in Scientology that we could all go back to and make that happen. That was a fluke. It's literally written into the DNA of Scientology that is the trajectory, and ultimately, there's going to be a reckoning for David Miscavige. His ultimate outcome is going to be really horrific. There's no other potentiality, even if it's just him alone in a room going insane and then dying. Even if it's just that, even if it's not in prison, or even if he's not killed at the hand of his victims, it's not going to be a good outcome. There is no good outcome.
No, he's definitely not the kind of person who in my interactions with him were never on a level where I'll give you an example. So I've been in the military for 20 years.
Right.
I've deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq a total of 5 times for probably a total of 52 to 53 months of combat time. So I'm a helicopter pilot, and I've done a lot of very amazing things, but at the same time, there's a lot of very traumatic things that I've been through.
Right.
At one point, I was shot down by an enemy RPG, and we were shot out of the sky. We were on fire. We were able to put it down and land and get everyone out safely, and we had no loss of life, but it was a very traumatic event. It was the most traumatic thing that I've ever been through. And when you're in a situation like that, what starts to happen is you have such a rush of adrenaline that your vision and your memory becomes very segmented. Like my normal memories are very fluid. They're sort of like a motion picture, but very, very high stress situations, they almost become little snapshots. And color and texture and memory, they do weird things, and you just have these little snippets all the time. So we went through this entire event. We got everyone back. Everyone survived. We had some minor injuries, but even though it was a bad thing that happened, we had a good outcome. But it was extreme trauma. There was a fire. There were people that were hurt. We were able to get everyone kind of rounded up and all that. But through the end of this, we got back, And the first night that once we were done with everything, I went to sleep, and my thoughts were so troubled while I was sleeping. But do you know what I was having dreams about? It wasn't about the shoot down. I was having dreams of being back at Golden Era Productions, not about the combat situation that I was
Unbelievable.
in. So any bad dreams that I've ever had, I've never had anything that related to the life that I chose for myself, even though there might be trauma related to it. And I've been able to, go to counseling that the military has helped me with, and be able to process this, to be able to grow from these things. But whenever I have a bad dream, or whenever I have something that usually bothers me, it's about my early childhood or the time that I spent at Golden Era Productions. It's not about what you would expect it to be. Now, I know there's people that have had much more traumatic things happen, and the physical injuries that, are severe to the point of, debilitating, and they have extreme post-traumatic stress disorder about those combat incidents. But for me, where my mind went back to was these earlier events that happened, and I call them Dave dreams. And I've talked to people. It's like, hey, are you still having Dave dreams? And like, well, I keep a little journal, and it kind of helps. Fucking everybody that worked for that guy has a Dave dream. I 100% think that is true.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that. And it's one of the things, as much as I feel that I had a unique window into the Sea Org, and I worked with Sea Org members. I had Sea Org members who were my bosses. I had Sea Org members who worked under me. As much as I think everybody I know, and now including you, talks about these dreams. I never had one. Those aren't the dreams that I have. So I think that to some degree, I am missing some insight. But dreams, you don't know. I tell you, I had a funny thought, Mike.
Right.
You know how immunity works, right? Like how inoculation works, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a little bit of that thing to build your immunity. Maybe those days at Gold, and I don't mistake me that I'm saying there's something positive about it.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. I agree.
Yeah, that they sort of inoculated you a little bit, so that against that trauma, so that maybe some of your crewmates on the helicopter who might have not had that weren't inoculated against the kind of trauma.
I think that's probably true. And I've also just found different people have different tolerances for stress.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, they don't understand. I mean, I ended up with a sleep disorder, a very serious sleep disorder, a trauma-based sleep disorder, which I identify as a product of working at Gold. And a lot of service people who were young and fit came back from Iraq, came back from combat with this same kind of sleep disorder. And it's 100% trauma-based. So, but not everybody gets it. It really depends on a lot of things. It's just, not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer. I mean, it's just like,
right. There's got to be genetic components. There's just, everybody's different. Yeah. So, but for me, the endeavor of being in the military has been the most physically demanding thing that I've ever done. And just the different types of training, and then just the events that I've been in, but it hasn't been as emotionally demanding as the life that I came from before. So in many respects, the hardest thing for people to overcome is their mental blocks. And those things are the harder barriers than the physical, because if you're out of shape, or if you're struggling to do certain things, if you do it for long enough, your body gets into shape. And as long as you're mentally going after it, your body will get there. In some instances that doesn't work for everybody, but when you're in that situation, your body kind of adapts. It's an organism that is able to change based off of the situation it finds itself in. But mentally is the biggest thing to get after. So when I was already, I went into it with the thing thinking that the military is, in terms of some of these situations of like somebody yelling at you, is like, that's not that bad. This is like, hey, these are rookie numbers. You're going to have to pump these numbers up a little bit. That whole thing is like, hey, and then I can see some people around me, they're like this. And I'm like, okay, maybe it'll get a little bit worse. And there were things that were very, very hard, but the mental aspect of it for me, I think I was already expecting something I was expecting it to be way worse than it actually was. But then I just had to meet the physical portion of it, which is the easier of the two, I would say.
Well, I would think also in the military, you're not being gaslit.
No, it is the military, and
it's a different kind of conditioning.
It is not for everybody. I'm going to tell you right now. And it is an organization which has a very specific mission, and they there's qualification things like if you have flat feet, you can't be in the military. If you have
Right.
certain physical limitations, if you have certain mental limitations, they just won't take you. So, but they it's also very much a meritocracy. Like if you work hard
Right.
and you put it in, and again, different people will have different experiences, but from my experience, you put in the hard work and you put forward the effort and you do the best that you can do at something, and the majority of the time that's going to work out for you, and you're going to move up at a very steady rate. You'll
Right.
never be rich off of being in military or, kind of a public service kind of thing, but you can live well and you can raise a family and you can have the life that you want to if it's right for you. And for a
Right.
lot of people it's not the right thing for them, but for me
Right.
it was.
And a lot of people get very valuable training that then,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, is highly paid. They have high earning jobs in the private sector.
For me, and for me, I decided, hey, I'm going to make a career out of this. It was
Mhm.
something that I wanted to do, and it gave me the opportunity to do something that I love. But a lot of people will do service, and they'll do whatever their initial enlistment is, and they'll get that job. They'll get that on the job training. They'll then be able to move into the private sector and be very
Right.
successful doing
Yeah, I
something
mean, I
there.
know more than one helicopter pilot who works in Hollywood doing motion picture aviation. They're making good money, and they're military trained, so
Mhm.
which
Well,
actually
it's
makes
expensive to
them,
learn how to fly a
yeah,
helicopter,
for
and like to
sure.
have somebody do it for you, and then for them to pay you, it's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm doing what I love, and you're paying me to do it, so I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
I
yeah.
do. I used to fly with one guy who specifically went into the forestry service to be trained as a helicopter pilot because he wanted a job in the film business. So,
Mhm.
that,
Absolutely.
yeah, that does happen. But, he did his service. It's totally legit. So yeah, anyway, people love seeing pictures. So, I have a picture of Sam here from the old days. I thought you might like to see it, or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But,
It
yeah,
was a lifetime ago,
yeah,
and
it
that's
was.
okay. I'm
This
sure.
is this is Sam. This is Sam on the left. Now, the reason this looks period is because we were shooting a film within a film. If you can look in the background and you can see this person wearing a blue T-shirt, so that's
Yeah.
off the set. But these are
Okay.
costumes. We were
Mhm.
actually She was playing a makeup artist in a period film that was supposed to take place in the 40s. So
Interesting.
so at least now you can everybody can put a face to it. And this was, I have very little pictures from all of my years in Scientology because of the security. They really clamped down. You had to get rid of all photos. They confiscated everything. I have very little, but I did manage to get this picture of Danny
Of
while he was
Danny?
still alive having breakfast
Oh, wow.
at my house. And that's on the left. That's Fleur. I think her last name was Thomason. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Fleur
Lou's
Thomas.
sister, right?
Mhm.
Remember her?
Yes, I
Lou,
do.
Dave's girlfriend, that would be her sister, and that other person is Danny's partner. So there's Dan, and there you go. Now you can put something to that. I have so little, it's amazing. So, but I
Yeah.
think that pretty much. I think we've covered
Oh, we
pretty
really
much.
have. I've enjoyed this conversation, Mitch. I
Yeah,
really
me
appreciate
too.
you having me on.
It's my pleasure. Anytime you want to, I may think of some other things I want to ask you. So
Yeah, for sure.
let's just cover some of these questions here.
Okay,
Uh,
for sure.
First of all, I have a question. How many other people this is from Ann Battles. How many other people do you think experienced SA and people were afraid to speak about it? The same reason your mom was. Your mom is so sweet. It is just so sweet. It is just that it happened.
She is wonderful. I It's hard for me to give. I don't like to add conjecture, but I'll say that just anecdotally from other people that I've talked to, there has been other instances of this. The thing that's so hard to put, unless people share their stories, and I'm not saying that people have to share their stories. That is a very personal decision,
Right.
but no one speaks to each other there. You're not
Mhm.
allowed to share your opinions, your thoughts. It's very much Sterling makes this reference. Sterling Tompkins, he has his own channel, but he says being and working in the Sea Organization and in Scientology is like the novel 1984,
Right.
and that is 100% true. So I know I call my channel Mike Brown 101, but in 1984, the room 101 is where people go to get
Oh,
reprogrammed in their
right.
thoughts.
I wondered. I thought it was
That's not why
because
I call it that. It's because I was in the 101st Airborne.
Oh, I thought you were
or
I
maybe
thought
I love Depeche Mode 101. I don't know, but anyway,
oh,
I'm all over
please,
the
no more
place.
Depeche Mode,
Yeah,
please.
we have Mark Headley for
We
that.
have enough. Uh, he overran me on that years ago. I thought it was because you were the 101st Mike Brown to get a tag on
No,
YouTube.
it's
No,
I
those are
was
all great. No, I love backstories,
I was in the
Mike.
101st. I was in the 101st Airborne, my last deployment. So I was like, you know what? This kind of is just going to be like
No,
a
that's
little thing.
perfect. No, that's
If you know,
perfect.
you know. But the Room 101 thing for 1984, that is what it's like. Like,
Right.
hey, we're going to make you believe things that aren't true
Mhm.
and make it hard for you until you finally decide that you're going to agree with illogic.
Well,
And
yeah,
that's what it's
exactly.
like there.
Absolutely, 100%. Do you remember? Okay, so one thing that occurred to me, you first leave Scientology and you're like, wow, that was stupid. And then, the further away you get from it, the louder you start yelling, that was stupid. Until eventually
Mhm.
you're going, that was so stupid. Uh, but there's this thing when you're a quote unquote pre-clear and you're receiving auditing, you're not allowed to talk about your case, remember? In other words,
Right.
the stuff that's going on with you, the
And
stuff
that would include abuse.
that would accuse
That you're being made responsible for the abuse
right,
that has been
right. And
perpetrated on
so
you.
you believe that it is self-damaging for you to be speaking about your case with anybody but your auditor. And this is one of the ways I never realized this until recently. It's one of the ways they keep you isolated. You could literally get into ethics trouble by speaking about your case. If you were SA, that's your case. If you were doing
Right.
something, that's your case. Just like that story that Rachel told, that guy that was talking to her about,
Yeah.
what he was doing with the children of families.
Well, mhm.
Yeah, he was talking to her as an auditor. He couldn't talk to anybody.
Yeah, and then the most probably salient examples of all of this are all of the Jane Does that spoke out against Masterson. Like they had to
Exactly.
deal with this whole thing of like not being able to come forward and like being gaslit and all this sort of stuff when they
Right.
finally were. So that is part of the culture, that this whole thing of me complaining like there's not a process for a person to be able to come forward and actually like say, hey, I need help, something happened to me. That is 100% true, and there's a growing number of instances of this, and Rosemary's story is one of them, and the Jane Does, and there's other people out there, and this
Mhm.
is not a uniqueness, this is the culture of that organization.
I guess the best answer to that question, because you can't put a number to it, is probably more than we all imagine.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
I found as I dig deeper, like you said, that it's, and I made this analogy with Aaron. It's like that ShamWow thing, but wait,
Oh,
there's
right.
more.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
That
it's
guy
like
was a
holy crap.
Scientologist.
He
That's
was
so funny.
Vince
Yeah,
from
he was. Did
ShamWow.
you know that?
I did. That's why I
Yeah.
think it's hilarious too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It has a little subtext to it. Hey, here's a comment I want to read. From Catherine. Catherine, Rosemary was too sweet for Scientology, but she did help others. Listen to how Mitch remembers her.
Absolutely.
And I'm not the only one that remembers her that way. This is just like common across the boards. She's just one of those people. Mike, here's something from you. This is from Cece's Comfort Cooking.
Hey,
Uh,
Cece.
yeah, and by the way, I'll go visit her site. She inspired me. I've got some cooking stuff I'm going to do. I just haven't gotten around to it.
I'm
And
excited.
anyway, her question is for Mike. Who was the ED? Who was the ED at the Boulder Mission when your parents got into Scientology?
So it was Martha Wells and
Wow.
Rex. Yeah. So Martha, who was actually then ended up moving to Los Angeles, her husband Rex wasn't in the Sea Org. I think he maybe had an LSD issue. I don't know. But Beckett Wells, I remember him. He was up at the Gold Base.
Oh,
He was
wait
the
a minute.
electrician.
Wait, well, Beckett was originally on the shoot crew. He was in the grip
Right.
department. He
But
was a
his
gaffer,
mother,
right?
yeah, so he's a couple years older than me. So he was kind of, when I was about 10 years old, Beckett was maybe 13 or 14.
Hmm.
His mother, Martha Wells, was the mission holder in Denver. That when my family got into Scientology back, in 19 maybe 85, 86 timeframe, I think
Right.
86. And that was we were there. And then when we then moved forward to Los Angeles and my mother joins the Sea Organization, Martha is then working for Guillaume Lecerf as I think one of his assistants in exec strata, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
I didn't know her. I certainly knew Beckett. He was a character.
Hmm.
Uh,
Absolutely. Love Beckett.
yeah. Okay. So, and then we have another question for Mike. This is from Purple Groovy 69. Question for Mike Brown. Does your mom have an opinion about the whereabouts of Shelley M?
I think that she is. This is the thing so everyone kind of thinks she's probably at the CST base, and I
Right,
tend to agree with that. But I
right.
have an opinion about that, not from my experience in Scientology, because the location of Church of Spiritual Technology, and if people come and go from there or anything like that, is such a tightly guarded secret within Scientology. It is. I don't even know how to, it would be like the most confidential levels of federal government that people don't even think exist and are
Oh yeah,
almost like
area. What is it? Area.
Area
Yeah,
51.
Area 51.
Yeah,
They'd be like Area 51. So
that's what Church of Spiritual Technology is like. So she's probably a consumer of these videos and these questions and stuff very much like everyone else is, because she knew Shelley, because she was kind of plugged into that
right,
whole service
right.
service thing there. But I don't know that she has any opinion that's any different than anybody else. I mean, I think that Shelley's probably at that CST property,
Yeah, I have no
just
doubt. I
being
ran
kept
into
happy as best they can.
Well, yeah, I ran into her in 2008 in Redlands, which was on the way to the base. It's where you'd stop to have lunch, and
Yeah.
if you drive the only road south from Redland from that CST base up in Big Bear, you can end up at Redlands. Redlands is a nice place to go to shop and have lunch and stuff. And I ran
Yeah.
into her there. I didn't know she was missing yet. She'd been gone for 3 years, but like we talked about when Rosemary went to the RBF, people come and go for years, and you're like, oh, they got reassigned. They went to open up Russia or some other little
Mhm.
country or a little country.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I have no doubt that she's up there. It's just
I have to wonder, Mitch, the chances of you running into her, like I'm sure that that's not something that she commonly goes like, "Hey, I'm going to go and have Chipotle."
no.
She must have been out for some sort of medical appointment, because she was with handlers,
Yeah.
her friends,
Oh yeah, she
and
was
that
with. I know who she. I know the
Antonella,
people.
and yeah.
No, yeah, she was with Elsie Ben Rhyme, who was then Ben Rhyme, and
So
she was.
I'm
Yeah,
sure that it was such a colossal, like, dumpster fire of a flap that you ran into her. I'm sure, like, it was reported up. We fucking ran into Mitch, like, oh
yeah.
my
Well,
God. And Mitch is like, hey.
oh yeah, totally. I was kind of like, well, whenever you run into staff members, especially SEAC members, especially from the base, you run into them somewhere else, and they were all in uniform, right? They were casual, dressed their uniforms down. They're like,
Mhm.
it's always that weird because it's very out of context.
Right.
You run into them at a movie, like people would say, I ran into David Miscavige at a movie in Hollywood Boulevard, and they're like freaking out. He doesn't do that anymore. That was years ago. So
Mhm.
there was that awkwardness, but there was something else, and I didn't know it at the time, that she was, under
Under
extreme
watch. Mhm.
extreme supervision. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
they looked at me, so I had to go over and say hi, and it was very casual, chatty. How you doing? Good. And then it was kind of like one of them. I don't remember. I think it was Anne, formerly Rathbun, said,
Mhm.
"So what are you doing here?" And it was just a little.
Oh, the second she gets back, like, I bet the second you walked out, she was on a cell phone saying, we just ran into Mitch when
And
we
I
were
said,
coming
"Oh,
back.
I'm on my
Shelley
way
was
to the."
hungry and we had to get her something to eat, like, on the way back from a doctor's
Yeah,
appointment. And we
yeah.
ran into freaking Mitch. Like, what are,
Well,
like, oh my God.
they seemed to calm down as soon as I said, "Oh, I'm on my way to the base. I stop here every Monday for lunch." Then they realized I wasn't part of some,
Right.
that I wasn't tailing them, right? So anyway.
Yeah, but I guarantee there's a report somewhere about that occurrence.
Oh yeah,
There's no doubt in my mind, because that was, I guarantee, a problem.
yeah.
Even though you were just like, whatever.
Yeah, I never heard about it. I mean, never came up. People were just fine to leave it alone because I
Mhm.
wasn't, I wasn't talking about it. So anyway, so I
Wow.
think there's that. Okay, we got that. Let me see if we got anything here. Other questions, if anybody has, and then before we bring this to a controlled landing, um, which I guess is even more pertinent with having a helicopter pilot as a guest. I often say we'll bring this to a controlled landing, but for your
That's a good
sake,
saying. I'm a
yeah,
big fan of that sort of thing. I mean,
yeah, I'll bet.
any landing you can walk away from is a good one, right, Mitch?
Yeah. Well,
If you can use the aircraft again, it's even better.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. As long as you're doing the taxpayers a favor, then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can remember, I flew a lot for work, right? For aviation cinematography, right?
Hmm.
And then after a while, I just didn't like it. So I'd send up like an ACAM, or I'd send somebody else up. And then, we use those little like aviation band walkie-talkies to
Right.
communicate from the ground to blah, blah, blah. So I would just stay in the ground. But at first it's fun. And then, you get to know some pilots. I worked with a guy I was actually married to a Scientologist, a guy named Peter McKiernan, who's one of the more famous motion picture helicopter pilots. Yeah, he did all the diehards, and he did like his list of credits is just like insane.
Hmm.
And I learned a very important lesson from Peter. We're over time, but I think you're going to appreciate this as a
Sure.
helicopter instructor, because you know this. You're going to go, oh yeah, of course. We were going back to Palm Springs from Joshua Tree, right? Or Yucca Valley. And so you fly over this cliff, right? It's a cliff. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're 200 feet off the ground, and then you're 1,500 feet off the ground, just like that. Boom. And you can see the airport to the right, right? And then off to the left. But for some reason, the pilot turns to the left. Peter turns to the left. And then he goes straight, and then he turns to the right. And I'm like, what's happening? Because you talk a lot about it's boring. You're sitting there with the pilot. It's just you and
Yeah.
him and a cameraman in the back. And so you just
Right.
chat. And, and I was fascinated by what they do flying helicopters, right? And he said, oh, well, you always cross the tower at the wire, right? Now, you know this. You know exactly
Hmm.
what that means.
Hmm.
We're 1,500 feet off the ground, right? There's no wires for 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
And yet he looked down there and he saw two towers, and
Hmm.
he
It's
turned,
high tension wires.
yeah, high tension wire towers, and he turned to the closest tower, which was away from the airport, flew over the tower, and then changed his heading to the airport. And I said,
Yeah.
but I don't understand. There's no chance you're going to hit that wire. And he just looks at me and he says, you always cross at the tower.
Absolutely.
Like,
So that's one thing that is built into aviation, and that's, if you look at it, kind of on a little tangent, but this is interesting. Aviation as a profession has some of the best statistics in terms of mishaps, but whenever something
right,
happens, it's a significant event, and
right,
then there's a lot of learning that goes into it after that. So there's things that we do as a matter of course, like you'll do these checklists every single time on
right,
how you do the run-ups and how
right,
you do the shutdowns and the
right,
things that you do and the procedures that you do. If you've done them a million times, you do it every single time as though it's the first time ever. You try to keep it fresh in your mind, because those little attention to details and basics
right,
matter. So if you start getting lazy about it at high altitude, well, when you're lower and then you start and you're not paying the same level of
right.
respect to the things that can constantly kill you, you start to get sloppy. And when you get,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's old pilots, there's bold pilots, but there's
right, yeah,
no old bold pilots.
right. Yeah, because yeah, then Peter said to me, he said, well, where do you draw the line? Like he said, if you start compromising that rule, you're going to keep pushing it closer and closer and closer and
100%.
closer, and eventually you're going to die. And I walked away from that thinking that I had learned this great life lesson, that when it comes to people's lives, you follow the rules, because it's a life and death situation. People's lives
Mhm.
are at risk. And in those situations, you hold to that standard. You never compromise it. So, hey, I learned that from a helicopter pilot, Mike. And I
There you go.
believe Peter was military
It's good
trained.
stuff.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that you can apply that to a lot of things, but when I go up and I fly by myself, because I do civilian flying just for fun sometimes,
right,
and I'm usually always with a crew. So I'm with another pilot, we have a flight engineer, multiple crew depending on what mission we're
right,
doing. And I'm constantly talking. Everything's verbalized. You say it, you get a response. There's this almost
right,
like this banter, this patter
right,
that you go through all the time.
right. Yeah,
Well,
we've
when
seen
I'm
it in the
out there,
movies.
right. But when I'm out there by myself, I'm literally talking to myself out loud. I'm not
Oh,
doing it in my head.
wow.
I'm like, "Bow, bow,
Right.
bow, 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 bow." And I was looking around. I'm like, I am literally talking to myself. And I'm like, and I love it, because I'm getting exactly what,
Yeah.
it's like, but
Yeah, but it's
that's
key.
just how it works.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
maintaining that standard of safety. Okay,
absolutely.
yeah, it's amazing. Okay, hold on. I got something here for me. This from Dora Explora. Thank you for the super chat. Mitch, in the 70s, I had the same addiction as you. I kicked it cold, but I shudder to think what may have happened if Scientology would have been around in northern BC. Well, you know
Right.
what? It wasn't, and here we are. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so
Awesome, Dora.
No need to shudder. And congratulations on your recovery. I'm assuming, like me, you walked away from addiction and never looked back. That's a whole nother story. I'm not even going to get into it, because while I recovered in the midst of Scientologists and Scientology, in the final analysis, that had nothing to do with it. It was just a matter of where I was at. Okay, good. So moving right along, I think we're done. No more questions. I think we need to wrap this up here. So Mike, I want to thank, I have to find my outro. Okay, good. There it is. So listen, Mike, thanks. Good luck. Let's do this again. I'm looking forward to seeing, watching your progression as speaking out and hearing more about Rosemary. And when you see her, please tell her I said hello.
Well, there's a very good possibility she's watching you right now.
Oh, fantastic. Hello, Rosemary. I hope you are. If you're not, watch this later and know that I remember you fondly. And with that, we're going to go. Bye, guys. Oh!